I noticed it because the hallway light was off. That alone shouldn't have meant anything. I don't always leave it on. Some nights I do, some nights I don't. But that evening, standing just inside the front door with my jacket still zipped and my keys still warm in my hand, I was certain I'd left it on. I didn't step inside right away. The house was quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet that comes with familiarity, but a held quiet, as if the space itself were listening. The air felt still, thicker than usual, like it hadn't moved in a while. I reached back and locked the door. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed down the hallway longer than it should have. I waited, almost without realizing it, for something to respond to that sound. Nothing did. I stood there for several seconds longer, staring into the dark hallway, my eyes slowly adjusting. The outline of the coat closet, the edge of the bathroom doorway, the faint glow coming from the kitchen clock at the far end of the hall. Everything was exactly where it should be. And yet, I set my keys down on the small table by the door. They landed harder than usual, the metal clinking sharply against the wood. The sound felt intrusive, like I'd broken a rule I didn't know existed. I took off my jacket and hung it up. As I did, I noticed the air felt warmer than it should have. Not stifling, not uncomfortable, just warm enough to register. I frowned and walked farther into the house. The thermostat was mounted on the wall near the living room entrance. I hadn't meant to check it. My feet just carried me there automatically. The screen was lit. The temperature was set several degrees higher than I remembered. I stood there, staring at the numbers, trying to recall touching it that morning. I replayed my routine in my head. Wake up, shower, coffee, grab my bag, lock the door. I didn't remember adjusting it. That didn't necessarily mean I hadn't. Sometimes habits run on autopilot. Still, the uncertainty bothered me more than the temperature itself. I left it alone. In the living room, the lamp beside the couch was on. A soft yellow glow filled the space, casting long shadows across the walls. I stopped just inside the doorway, my hand hovering near the switch. I was almost certain I'd turned it off. I turned it off now. The room immediately felt smaller. The shadows deepened. The silence pressed in closer. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I walked into the kitchen and froze. There was a glass on the counter, half full of water. I stared at it without moving, my mind taking a moment longer than usual to process what I was seeing. I don't leave glasses out. I rinse them and put them in the sink. That's always been a habit of mine, one I've had since I lived with roommates years ago. I stepped closer and picked it up. The glass was cold, not cool from sitting out. Cold in the way it feels when it's just been filled. I stood there holding it, my fingers wrapped around the smooth surface, feeling the chill seep into my skin. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Somewhere in the walls, something ticked. I poured the water down the sink and rinsed the glass thoroughly. I didn't rush. I watched the water swirl, listening to the sound until it faded. Then I placed the glass upside down on the drying rack. When I turned around, I noticed the chair at the dining table was pulled out slightly. Not dramatically. Not enough that someone else might notice at first glance. Just enough that it felt intentional. I nudged it back into place with my foot. The scrape of wood against tiles sounded louder than it should have, cutting through the quiet like a sudden movement in the dark. That was the moment the feeling changed. Up until then, I'd been mildly unsettled, curious, annoyed even. But something about the chair settling back into place made my chest tighten. I took a slow breath and scanned the room. Everything else looked normal. I checked the rest of the house methodically. Bedroom, bathroom, spare room, closet, windows, doors, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no missing items, no open windows, no unlocked doors. I told myself I was tired. That night I went to bed earlier than usual. I locked the bedroom door behind me. I noticed myself doing it, felt the resistance of the lock under my fingers, heard the click. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house made its usual nighttime noises, pipes shifting as the temperature changed, the faint creak of wood settling, the distant sound of traffic from the main road several blocks away. Eventually, sleep came. I woke up before my alarm. The room felt wrong, not colder, not warmer, just different. The air felt heavy, like it had weight to it, like it had been disturbed and hadn't settled back yet. I stayed still and listened. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I realized I was hearing breathing. It was soft, slow, measured, not mine. I held my breath. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't move for a long time after that. When I finally sat up, the room felt empty again. Cool. Still. I unlocked the door and checked the house. Nothing had changed. In the kitchen, the glass I'd washed the night before was back on the counter. Clean. Dry. Exactly where it had been earlier. I stood there staring at it until my coffee grew cold in my hands. I didn't touch the glass. I stood in the kitchen holding my mug, watching a thin line of steam rise and disappear into the air. The house was quiet in the way it usually was in the mornings. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the microwave blinked steadily. Outside, I could hear a car pass, tires hissing faintly on damp pavement. Everything sounded normal. That almost made it worse. I poured the coffee down the sink and rinsed the mug. I didn't drink anything before leaving that morning. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer than necessary. At work, I tried to focus. Emails, meetings, small talk in the hallway. I nodded when people spoke to me. I smiled when it was expected, but part of my attention stayed fixed somewhere else, replaying the kitchen over and over again. The glass, the chair, the breathing. I told myself there were explanations. Someone could have broken in and left without taking anything. Maybe a neighbor with a key. Maybe I'd simply been more tired than I realized. None of those explanations settled comfortably. When I came home that evening, I stood outside the door longer than usual. I listened before unlocking it. The house didn't sound different from the outside. No movement, no voices, just the faint hum of electricity behind the walls. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The hallway light was on. This time I knew I hadn't left it on. I stood there, staring down the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. The light cast the same familiar shadows along the wall. Nothing looked disturbed, nothing looked wrong. I locked the door and moved farther in. The thermostat was set higher again. I lowered it without thinking and continued into the living room. The lamp was off. The couch cushions were neat. The room felt unused. In the kitchen, the counter was clean. No glass, no crumbs, no chair pulled out. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I didn't turn the TV on. I didn't play music. I wanted to hear the house as clearly as possible. Around midnight, I went to bed. I locked the door again. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing happened. I slept. The next morning, the towel in the bathroom was damp. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers resting against the edge of the sink. The towel hung crookedly on the rack, like it had been grabbed and thrown back without much care. I knew I hadn't showered that morning. I took the towel down and smelled it. It smelled faintly of soap. Not my soap, not the brand I used. That was the first time I felt something close to fear. Not panic, not adrenaline, just a slow tightening behind my ribs. I washed the towel and left for work. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Small things, quiet things. The thermostat adjusted slightly when I wasn't home. The shower curtain pulled closed, cabinet doors not quite aligned the way I left them. food disappearing in small amounts. Once, I noticed the bathroom mirror had been wiped clean in a rough circle, like someone had leaned close to it. I started paying attention to details I'd never cared about before. The way the door hinges sounded when they moved, the exact position of objects on the counter, the level of the water in the toilet bowl. I began taking photos before leaving for work. Not of everything, just certain things. The kitchen counter, the thermostat, the bathroom mirror. When I came home, I compared them. Sometimes nothing had changed. Sometimes something had. Once I found a new photo on my phone, a blurry shot of the kitchen, taken from an angle that suggested someone shorter than me had held it. The timestamp said it was taken while I was at work. I stared at it until my eyes ached. That night I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake listening, my body tense, my mind strangely calm. Around 3 in the morning, I heard movement again. Soft footsteps in the hallway. I sat up slowly, careful not to make the bed creak. The sound moved past my door, paused, then continued toward the kitchen. I pressed my ear against the door. A cabinet opened, then another. The sounds were unhurried, familiar, like someone who knew where everything was. I waited for my fear to spike. It didn't. What I felt instead was something colder, a quiet certainty. This wasn't random. Whoever it was had been here before. Many times. I stayed in the bedroom until morning. When I finally opened the door, the house was quiet again. On the kitchen counter there was a note, a small piece of paper torn unevenly from a larger sheet. It lay flat, carefully placed. I didn't mean to wake you. I read it twice before my mind caught up. The handwriting wasn't rushed. It wasn't shaky. It looked practiced, apologetic. I didn't touch the note. I didn't call anyone. I packed a bag that morning and left. I stayed with a friend on the other side of town. I told them I needed a break from my place, that something about it had started to feel wrong. I didn't go into details. I didn't trust myself to explain it in a way that would sound reasonable. They didn't push. They just handed me a spare key and showed me where I'd be sleeping. The first night there, I slept hard. No dreams, no waking up suddenly. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the room felt empty in a way that was reassuring, ordinary. The air moved when I moved. The silence belonged to no one. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. All day, my thoughts drifted back to my house. Not in sharp flashes, but in slow, intrusive loops. The note, the careful handwriting, the phrasing. I didn't mean to wake you. Not sorry. Not I was hungry. Not I didn't know you were home. Just that. I realized what bothered me most wasn't the idea of someone being there. It was how considerate they seemed to be. After a few days, I convinced myself I needed to go back. I told myself avoiding it wouldn't fix anything. If something was happening, I needed to understand it. I needed clarity. I went back during the day. The house looked normal from the outside. Same pale siding, same small porch, the same window by the front door that caught the afternoon light. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air felt colder than I remembered. Stale, almost, like a space that had been closed up. I walked through each room slowly. Nothing was obviously wrong. The glass was gone. The note was gone. The thermostat was low. Everything was tidy. Almost too tidy. In the bathroom, the mirror was spotless. No streaks, no fog, no wiped circles. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at my reflection, trying to catch something behind me. The room stayed empty. I stayed that night. I didn't unpack. I kept my bag near the door. I locked everything. I placed a chair under the bedroom doorknob. I lay awake listening. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. The silence stretched until it began to feel intentional again. Around 4 in the morning, I noticed something else. The house smelled different. Not bad, just used, like someone else's soap lingering faintly in the air, like warmth that didn't belong to me. I didn't sleep after that. Over the next week, nothing happened. No notes, no damp towels, no changes. I started to feel foolish, embarrassed even. I told myself I'd let my imagination fill in the blanks. That stress had done this to me. I began unpacking again, settling back into routine. That was when I noticed the attic hatch. It was open, just a few inches, not enough to draw attention unless you were looking up. I stood beneath it, staring at the dark seam in the ceiling. I don't go into the attic. I never have. It's small, unfinished, full of insulation and old boxes from before I moved in. I pulled the ladder down slowly. The attic smelled stale and dusty, old wood, dry insulation, but underneath that was something else. Body heat. I climbed up partway and shone my phone's flashlight around. The boxes had been moved, not dramatically, just shifted. A small cleared space near the far wall, a blanket folded neatly, an empty water bottle. I climbed down without going any farther. I didn't go back up. I closed the ladder and stood there, staring at the hatch. Everything made sense then. The careful movements, the quiet footsteps, the warmth, the restraint. They hadn't been breaking in. They'd already been there. That night I slept with the lights on. I woke up just before dawn. The bedroom door was open. The chair had been moved aside. On the floor, just inside the doorway, was another note. I'll be gone soon. I sold the house 2 weeks later. I didn't tell the buyer about the attic. I didn't go back after moving out. In my new place, I don't have an attic. I don't leave notes. And I don't ignore small things anymore, because I learned something important in that house. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't being watched, it's being accommodated.